The Cathar priest was revered across galaxies, a being who could unravel the minds of lesser species with a single thought. When the alien priest tried to read human minds, he found something he couldn't control: a flood of chaos, memories, and contradictions that shattered his sanity. Now he won't stop screaming, his cries echoing across the void, a chilling warning of the horrors lurking within humanity's infinite psyche. The starship loomed like a dark titan on the edge of Earth's solar system, an impossible presence in humanity's backyard. Its design defied logic: massive spires twisted upward like obsidian thorns, its surface rippling as though alive. No light escaped its form, yet it cast shadows that bent unnaturally in the vacuum of space. For days, the human fleet circled at a cautious distance, scanning, broadcasting messages, and waiting for an answer that never came. The silence was unnerving. Humanity, bold as it had grown in the age of interstellar travel, was not accustomed to being ignored. When the Cathar revealed themselves, their arrival shattered the quiet like a thunderclap. They did not emerge as explorers or conquerors, but as beings whose very existence demanded reverence. They transmitted their language, a thrumming, pulsing sound that reached not through human ears, but directly into the mind. The Cathar were tall and gaunt, their elongated figures draped in armor that shimmered with colors humanity had no names for, shifting endlessly like oil spilled on water. They moved with mechanical grace, each gesture deliberate, each word spoken like an ancient rite. They told humanity about their priest. The priest of the Cathar was no ordinary figure. He was the pinnacle of their kind, a being so attuned to the threads of the universe that he could peer into the depths of any mind and pull forth its truths. To the Cathar, he was a conduit of divine wisdom, a keeper of secrets so vast that lesser species would be crushed beneath their weight. They described him as a mind singer, a title steeped in celestial importance, one who could weave the innermost thoughts of others into something akin to understanding. It was a power the Cathar both worshipped and feared. And yet, something had gone terribly wrong. The priest, in his curiosity or perhaps arrogance, had chosen to probe the minds of humans. The Cathar did not elaborate on how or why this occurred, whether it was an act of curiosity, a test of strength, or simply a mistake. No one knew. But what followed sent tremors through their entire race. The priest's once orderly mind had become an unrelenting cacophony. He would not stop screaming. The Cathar spoke of his torment as if describing a sickness that could not be cured. He has fallen, they said, though their tone betrayed no emotion. What exactly had caused the priest's collapse was left deliberately vague, but one fact remained: humanity had broken something that should never have been touched. In the days that followed the transmission, humanity's curiosity turned to unease. Something about the priest's fate left a lingering dread among those who heard the broadcasts. Engineers, soldiers, and scientists alike dreamed of his cries in human wails echoing through silent voids. A feeling spread that humanity had opened a door it was never meant to touch, and on the other side was something infinitely larger, older, and crueler than they had ever imagined. The Cathar issued no threats, no ultimatums. They offered only a grim warning. There is a price for knowing. The first transmission came as an eerie wave, one that bypassed the limitations of language or technology. It was neither sound nor signal, but something deeper, like the resonance of thought itself spreading across every listening ear. The source was unmistakable, the Cathar vessel drifting at the edge of the solar system. It came as a pulsing rhythm in the minds of all who were sensitive enough to perceive it. No alarms sounded, no broadcasts interrupted human networks, and yet an invisible weight settled on the collective consciousness of humanity. The effect was subtle at first, almost like a whisper carried on a distant wind. Scientists struggled to explain it. Was it electromagnetic interference? A form of psychic energy? Or something stranger still, some force beyond the grasp of human understanding? The answer eluded them. But as the hours passed, the sensation grew stronger. Thoughts began to drift inexplicably, the minds of the most sensitive feeling oddly detached. Dreams became restless. Attention settled over humanity, pressing down like an unseen hand. And then came the priest's scream. Unlike the strange pulse, the scream was unmistakable. It tore through every communication channel on Earth, an unfiltered cry that sent chills through anyone who heard it. It wasn't sound no microphone or speaker could have transmitted something so raw. It was a vibration that resonated in the bones, bypassing ears and technology alike. The cry held no words, but it carried meaning all the same. It was pain pure, unrelenting torment. A mind shattering under its own weight. The scream did not stop. For minutes it reverberated through humanity, leaving stunned silence in its wake. When it ended, no one moved. The quiet afterward was almost worse, as though something unseen had been holding its breath and was now waiting. Governments scrambled for answers. Scientists were put on high alert. Theories emerged, each more desperate than the last. Was this a message, a warning, an attack? But deep down, those who had heard the scream understood the truth. It was not directed at them. It was the sound of something alive breaking under a pressure no mind should ever endure. The next transmission was not sound at all. It came as fractured visions, images that flickered across the minds of anyone listening. Flashes of a being on its knees, armor cracked, its long fingers clawing at its head. The priest. He was surrounded by shadows that moved without form, their edges flickering like dying embers. His screams persisted in these visions, silent yet deafening. Around him, the walls of his chamber twisted, writhing like living tissue. It was as though reality itself had begun to unravel, unable to contain what was happening within his mind. The Kadar issued a message through more conventional means, their voices cold and final. They warned humanity of the consequences. His mind has touched yours. He sees what cannot be unseen. He hears what cannot be silenced. And then they said nothing more. Across Earth, people felt it. A ripple of unease, as though the barrier between humanity and the unknown had thinned. Whatever had happened to the Kadar priest had unleashed something terrible, something that lingered unseen, whispering on the edges of perception. The decision to send an expedition aboard the Kadar vessel was met with hesitation and fear, but humanity had never been one to retreat from the unknown. A team of scientists, psychologists, and military specialists was hastily assembled, a group equipped with cutting-edge technology, but woefully unprepared for what awaited them. The Kadar had made no formal invitation, yet they allowed the human ship to approach their massive craft without resistance. It was as if they were waiting. The human vessel, dwarfed by the monolithic alien ship, docked against its impossible surface. Up close, the Kadar vessel's exterior seemed alive, dark plates that shimmered and pulsed with an organic rhythm. It was not metal as humans knew it, but something in between, as if grown rather than forged. No communication greeted the humans as they stepped into the void black airlock that opened for them, seemingly of its own will. The doors closed behind them without a sound, sealing them inside. Inside the ship, there was no light, no ambient hum of machinery. The silence was absolute, an oppressive weight pressing into their ears and minds. The walls were smooth and seamless, curving inward like a great labyrinth designed to disorient. There were no markings, no signs of life, only a sense of being watched. The team pressed forward, their breathing amplified by their suits as they shone beams of light through the suffocating dark. The ship seemed endless. They moved for hours, and yet there was no change in their surroundings. Some walls appeared to ripple when touched, as if the structure itself were breathing alive and watching. The farther they ventured, the more the air seemed to thicken. Though their suit systems reported normal oxygen levels, each step became harder, like walking through an unseen current that pushed against them. It was as if the very atmosphere resisted their presence. Then they found the chamber. The entrance to it appeared without warning. A vast circular doorway stretched impossibly high, opening into a space that defied explanation. The walls curved away into shadows, their surfaces etched with shifting patterns that seemed to flow like liquid light. At the center of the chamber was the priest. He was kneeling, his tall frame hunched as if crushed under an invisible weight. His once resplendent armor had lost its brilliance, the shifting colors replaced by dull, lifeless gray. Deep cracks spiderwebbed across his form, glowing faintly as though light struggled to escape from within. His hands clawed at his helmet, fingers digging into the surface as though trying to tear it away. Around him, the chamber pulsed with something, an unseen energy that made the air vibrate. The humans' lights flickered, their systems glitching as they stepped closer. As they observed him, they realized he was not still. The priest's body trembled, racked with spasms that grew more violent the nearer they came. The sound returned a whisper at first, like static, but it grew louder with each step until it became a roar within their helmets. It was not a sound they could hear with their ears. It was inside their heads, the priest's silent screams. And then, for the first time, one of the scientists began to scream back. The team watched in stunned horror as one of their own collapsed to his knees, his scream piercing through their comms and reverberating inside their helmets. His hands clutched at his head, his body convulsing as though some unseen force had seized him. The others tried to pull him back, shouting orders that dissolved into chaos, but the scientist could not hear them. His scream did not stop, high, ragged, and unnatural, as if something far greater than his mind had taken hold. And then he fell silent. His body slumped forward, motionless. His breathing remained steady, but his eyes, visible through the glass of his helmet, were wide, glassy, and unblinking. There was no recognition in them, only a hollow emptiness. The team froze, paralyzed by fear as the weight of the chamber seemed to bear down upon them. It was then they realized the truth. The priest was not merely screaming in pain. He was transmitting it. The Cathar priest's agony was a torrent of chaos, a flood of incomprehensible thoughts, sensations, and memories that poured out of his broken mind like a dam that had burst. What the humans had mistaken for silence in the ship was not silence at all. It was the noise of his suffering, vibrating through the walls, seeping into the air. The chamber was alive with it, an invisible storm of raw mental energy clawing at anyone who dared to come near. The priest's body spasmed violently again, his form convulsing as cracks along his armor began to widen. Through those fissures, the team could see something glowing faintly, a light that pulsed irregularly, like a dying star. His form was disintegrating, breaking apart under the unrelenting pressure of whatever his mind had encountered within humanity's collective consciousness. The team's lead scientist checked his instruments, his hands trembling as he scanned the readings. The data made no sense. The priest's mind was not deteriorating in a normal way, it was expanding. Fragments of memories, thoughts, and emotions were unraveling and recombining at impossible speed, an infinite stream of human experiences being played and replayed within him. It was as though the priest had opened a door into humanity's psyche and could no longer close it. The human mind was not singular, not orderly, not like the minds of the Cathar. It was chaotic cacophony of contradictions, desires, fears, and dreams all colliding in unrestrained motion. Where the Cathar sought unity, humans embodied fragmentation. The priest, who had once woven the minds of other species into coherence, had been overwhelmed by humanity's endless, shapeless complexity. He had tried to impose order on what could not be ordered, and now his mind was unraveling under the weight of infinite chaos. The chamber trembled, the strange patterns along its walls pulsating faster as if reacting to the priest's collapse. The team staggered back, understanding dawning on them like a cold wave. This was not an accident. This was a warning, an unintended consequence of hubris. The priest's power, so revered among the Cathar, had been his undoing when it came into contact with the unknowable chaos of the human psyche. The humans realized then that the priest's fate was irreversible. His screams were not just expressions of torment, they were the echoes of humanity itself, fragments of voices, thoughts, and truths that had taken root in his mind. He was no longer a priest of the Cathar. He was something else now, something broken, something lost. And worst of all, the team began to feel it too. The whisper of his agony, faint but growing, like tendrils reaching into their minds. The air inside the chamber grew heavier, pressing down like an invisible weight that squeezed at their skulls and slowed their thoughts. The faint whisper of the Cathar priest's torment crawled deeper into the team's minds, an insidious presence that scratched at the edges of reason. At first, it was subtle and intrusive hum, like an unrelenting vibration just out of reach, but as they lingered, it began to take form. The whispers became flashes of thoughts not their own, fragments of memories and images that they couldn't place, spiraling out of control like broken shards of glass. One of the soldiers stumbled forward, his legs buckling under him as he gasped. His suit monitors flared with erratic warnings, his brainwaves spiked, surging beyond safe levels. He dropped his rifle, his gloved hands clawing at his helmet, as though trying to rip it off to silence the noise. Another team member turned to help him, only to freeze mid-step, her breathing sharp and uneven as she fell to her knees. Their minds were unraveling, pulled apart by the same chaos that had consumed the Cathar priest. The remaining few scrambled back, desperate to retreat from the priest's proximity, but it was already too late. The chamber itself had become a conduit for his torment. The shifting patterns on the walls glowed brighter, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to sync with their thoughts. It was alive, reacting to their presence, feeding off their unraveling minds. The lead scientist's trembling hand hovered over his wrist controls, fighting to maintain his focus. His instruments displayed chaotic data, neural activity off the charts, brain functions flickering erratically as though being rewritten. A sickening realization struck him: their minds were resonating with the priest's. The Cathar's psychic scream, infinite and unfiltered, was reaching into the deepest layers of their thoughts. It didn't speak words. It didn't ask questions. It simply was a relentless flood of raw humanity reflected back at them, amplified by the priest's broken consciousness. And what they saw was horrifying. Images surfaced in their minds, incomprehensible at first but growing clearer with every passing second. They saw violence, wars raging across blood-soaked earth, the flash of nuclear fire tearing through cities. They saw humanity's cruelty and desperation, the starving faces of forgotten children, the cracked hands of laborers toiling for survival. But there was more. They saw joy, two bursts of pure, unfiltered love, moments of unity and triumph. They saw a species that defied order, embracing chaos as its essence. Humanity was not a simple collection of minds. It was all of it, all at once, an infinite tapestry of brilliance and madness woven together, refusing to be confined. The priest had tried to unravel that tapestry, to give it shape and order, but he had failed. And now, the team realized with dread it was trying to spread, to reach into their own minds and break them, just as it had broken him. The walls of the chamber began to hum, vibrating audibly now as though the ship itself were awakening. The scientist shouted to retreat, though the sound of his own voice felt distant and warped, as if he were underwater. Around him, the remaining team members staggered like puppets with broken strings, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The priest trembled at the center of it all, his cracked armor now bleeding light, brighter and brighter, until it cast harsh shadows that flickered across the chamber. He was no longer a being of flesh and thought he was something else now, a vessel of infinite, uncontrollable noise. The humans realized they had to escape, not just to save their lives, but to keep whatever this was from spreading any further. As the first bolts of light erupted from the priest's body, splintering through the walls, they ran. The team stumbled through the labyrinthine corridors of the Cathar vessel, their frantic footfalls muffled by the strange organic walls. Behind them, the chamber trembled with a low, resonant hum that grew louder with every step, an ominous pulse that chased them like the pounding of some colossal, unseen heart. The air itself felt thick, as though the ship were alive and exhaling around them. Their suits glitched intermittently, lights flickered, displays warped, and communications crackled with static. The priest's psychic chaos wasn't confined to that cursed room, it was spreading. Ahead, the corridors twisted and curved in ways that defied logic. Pathways they swore they'd just passed reappeared, as if mocking their attempts to escape. The ship was shifting. Whether it was conscious or simply responding to the priest's unraveling mind, no one could say, but the effect was clear. The vessel was trapping them. One of the soldiers turned a corner, only to stop abruptly, his breath ragged. The others caught up and saw what he was staring at, an endless wall where there had been an open path moments ago. Panic rippled through the group, their racing minds pulling at the edges of reason. The whispers had followed them, growing louder now, wriggling into their thoughts like splinters. Images broke in fragments of memories, feelings, and moments that weren't their own flooded their minds. Faces they didn't recognize, words they'd never spoken. Laughing, screaming, crying, emotions bleeding into one another until nothing made sense. One of the scientists pressed himself against the wall, eyes wide and unseeing, mumbling incoherently as his body slid to the ground. The lead scientist shook himself, forcing his fractured mind to focus. He realized the truth with a sickening jolt. The priest's unraveling had infected the ship, and through the ship, them. The psychic chaos was spreading like a virus, rewriting reality as it touched it. Their suits, their technology, their very minds were no longer barriers against it. The priest had opened a door, one that could not be closed, and now its echoes reverberated through everything. The hum deepened, shaking the walls as fractures began to spread along the surfaces, pulsing with blinding light. The ship itself was destabilizing, its physical form straining under the weight of the priest's torment. Pieces of the floor buckled, warping underfoot as beams of that same sickly light pierced through cracks like jagged teeth. The sound of something shattering deep, groaning like a planet splitting open, echoed through the halls. Then, the team heard it again. The scream. It was no longer just in their heads. It rolled through the corridors like a wave of pure force, rattling through their helmets and vibrating their bones. The priest's agony had grown into something alive, something spreading with hunger, seeking out minds to consume. As they ran, one soldier fell, his body twitching violently as the scream overtook him. His teammates didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. Survival had become instinctual, driven by the primal knowledge that if they hesitated for even a moment, the same fate would befall them. At last, the docking corridor came into view. The human ship waited like a fragile lifeboat against the looming monstrosity of the HFY vessel. The remaining team sprinted forward, but the air had grown so dense it was like moving through liquid. Their suits buckled under the strain, warning lights flashing red as systems failed one by one. The walls around the airlock groaned, tearing open to reveal more blinding cracks of light, the fractures spreading like veins. As they reached the ship, one final pulse rippled through the vessel. The psychic scream hit them like a shockwave, dropping the team to their knees as their minds were briefly torn open. For a split second, they saw it all, everything. Humanity's chaos, its brilliance, its madness, and the priest's broken mind trying to contain it. It was infinite, incomprehensible, and terrible. The airlock sealed behind them, and the human ship detached just as the HFY vessel erupted in a final blinding flash of light. The ship twisted, its form collapsing inward as though consumed by the force it had failed to contain. Then there was silence, cold, empty silence. But within that silence, the survivors knew the truth. This was not the end. Something had been set free. The human ship drifted away from the ruins of the HFY vessel, its crew silent as they floated in the void. The destruction had been absolute. Where the alien craft once loomed a monolith of incomprehensible power, there was now only debris, fragments of dark matter, scattered like dust across the stars. The ship had folded in on itself, as if reality could no longer hold its form. The survivors watched the hollow emptiness through the viewport, but none spoke. There were no words for what they had witnessed. The quiet of their small vessel should have been a relief, but it was not. The hum of their systems, the faint hiss of recycled air, these were familiar sounds, yet they felt wrong, like echoes distorted in a cavern too deep to measure. Though they had escaped the HFY vessel, something lingered within them. Each survivor sat motionless, staring straight ahead as if afraid to blink. Their hands trembled against their consoles, their movements mechanical and unsure. The lead scientist tried to focus on his instruments, seeking comfort in data, but the numbers wavered nonsensically. Diagnostics returned results that defied explanation, readings of mental energy spikes where none should exist. Vital signs on his team fluctuated erratically, rising and falling in ways that made no biological sense. He rubbed his temples, attempting to shake the static hum buzzing just beneath his thoughts. That hum had been growing louder since they left. It started as a faint pressure, a distant whisper that settled at the back of their skulls, easy to dismiss in the adrenaline-fueled chaos of escape. But now, in the stillness of their ship, it was undeniable. It was not sound. It was not signal. It was something deeper, a vibration that resonated inside them, spreading like a stain. The survivors exchanged glances, and in each other's wide, glassy eyes they saw the truth. They had not left the priest's torment behind. The priest had been consumed by humanity's chaos, but that chaos had not simply vanished when his mind shattered. It had passed through him like a conduit, spreading outward, carried by thought and memory, bleeding into the minds of those who had been close enough to feel its reach. The team had felt it back on the ship, a force not of the physical world, but something deeper, something intangible. Now it sat inside them, a parasite without form. As the hum grew louder, the scientists began to see flashes. shapes in his periphery, impossible shadows that moved without light. They disappeared when he turned his head, yet they felt real, like something waiting just beyond his vision. Images surfaced in his mind, faces of strangers he'd never met, laughter echoing in empty spaces, screams buried under waves of static. He clutched his head as his pulse quickened, but the images only multiplied. He could hear it, the priest's scream, not as a sound, but as a constant presence within his mind. He looked at the others. The soldier nearest him sat rigid, his helmet still on, though his breathing had grown slow and shallow. The second scientist muttered to herself, her words rapid and disjointed, eyes unfocused as though watching something no one else could see. The Cathar priest had been the first to break, but he would not be the last. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched endlessly, cold and unblinking. The survivors were still alive, if such a thing could be said of them now, but their bodies were only shells. Inside, their minds were fraying, unraveling under the same weight that had crushed the priest. Humanity's chaos, its infinite brilliance and darkness, had touched them, and they would carry it wherever they went. The scientist realized then, with creeping dread, that the priest's fate had not been his alone. Humanity had been glimpsed by something that should never have seen it, and the echoes of that encounter would spread. Perhaps it would end with them, this doomed crew adrift in the void, or perhaps it would not. The hum settled deeper, growing steady, resonant. It felt comforting now, like it had always been there, waiting for them to listen. Somewhere, deep in the quiet of space, one of the survivors began to scream. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizon Stories for more thrilling tales of science fiction and adventure.